All right, welcome back to Waveform. We're your hosts. I'm Marquez.
And I'm Andrew.
And we've got a lot to talk about today because we've got a lot of catching up to do, and there's just been a bunch of news and stuff happening that we've got our reactions to, and maybe a couple hot takes. So there's some good stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of Google and Apple. That's a big focus. I'm just gonna start with Google I/O because we had Google I/O last week.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of AI and software announcements and a lot of Android stuff, and I want to go through each of like some of these bigger bullet points and get your reactions, maybe give my reactions to them.
Yeah, I think real quick before we do that, the reason we had our Right to Repair one last week is because we were in California interviewing Sundar. That's on the channel, so check that out. But I'm sure a lot of people were wondering our thoughts on I/O, so sorry we're a week late, but
yeah, like I/O happened, and usually I will cover I/O in a video or just sort of make a wrap up, or if there's some interesting stuff, I'll do a video about it. But I didn't this year because as I/O was happening, we were packing up all our stuff to go interview Sundar, the CEO of Google and Alphabet, in Mountain View. So we flew out there, and that was a whole thing. So I didn't make a video about a lot of the stuff, but we'll talk about a lot of it. And you should watch that interview with Sundar. It's just a fun, like, little behind the curtain of like the guy that has been running this stuff for the past couple of years, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, and we found out that we were wondering if it was really live or not, and it was. The whole thing was live. It was pretty cool, them explaining.
That was one of the things. Yeah, we were wondering if I/O was really live. Like they put the little live counter in the corner, and they just said it was live, but it was so like well produced and well cut that I could be convinced, and it was quiet. And we were like, I don't know if there's any way for us to prove that this is not live, but one thing I've noticed is there hasn't been a single noise in the background. No helicopters, no airplanes flying overhead. They're shooting it outdoors. How is that possible? Before we were interviewing, I just asked Sundar about it. I was like, it was live, right? And he was like, yeah, it was nerve-wracking for me. It was definitely live. And I was like, how were there no airplanes or noises overhead? And he said they literally got a permit to restrict the airspace over their campus during the couple hours that they were shooting that.
Wild.
So
where do we get those permits? If we got that permit, it would shut down all of Newark Airport.
Yeah, we're way too close to a major
we're a little
airport.
too small, but
that is that's Google for you. So let's get into stuff they talked about.
Yeah, let's do it.
So first up, a couple maps enhancements, more bike lane stuff. Obviously, the sort of general improvements to Google Maps you expect. But one of them was eco-friendly routes. So now you can choose the fastest route or the route with no tolls or whatever other best route you want. This new one is eco-friendly route, which is cool. I don't know if I'm ever going to select that intentionally.
That was my first thought of the eco-friendly route is like, I'm always glad anyone's doing anything that makes things more eco-friendly, but I'm trying to think of like the number you would see on your Google Maps where you get, this will take 40 minutes and then the eco route takes 45 minutes. I think even 5 minutes, people are going to pick the just faster route.
Yeah,
like,
typically.
It always sounds good to do eco. Like you feel good about yourself, but most of the times when you're driving, you just want to get there as fast as possible. And I don't know what number people are going to not choose eco on.
You know, it's funny. I use Waze now almost all the time for any navigation. And Waze, even though Google owns Waze is a little bit more hyper, like, aggressive about saving you, like, 30 seconds to a minute and a half. So, like, if there's even a sniff of traffic on your usual route, it'll go a bunch of back routes to get you, like, you know, around that one block of traffic. Yeah. And it's like fine sometimes, but I've noticed it gets a little bit crazy. So, I don't know if you use Waze, but
no, but first of all, Waze, the UI itself, I just like Google Maps feels way more clean.
Waze is very ugly.
Yeah. But Claire and I actually have this like little conspiracy that, do you know when you're on Google Maps and if you're driving, it'll say like similar ETA or it usually is either similar ETA or it'll be like 5 minutes faster or 5 minutes slower. We're convinced that any 5 minute difference they don't add, because then you might be like wondering if you should click on the new route or not if it's just a 1 minute difference.
Oh, yeah.
And if like that is turning into a safety issue of like somebody trying to decide whether they should take this turn to save 1 minute.
I
and
believe
it's
so.
So negligible.
Yeah. Now, so Google will do that. Waze will just take the
Waze
fastest
will be
one.
like, you better get off now or you're going to lose 30 seconds.
It'll actively reroute me. I'll be coming up to an exit and it'll be like, nah, you know what? Take this exit. And it'll be able to, I bet that's just going to save me 1
Jersey
minute.
slide right now.
It'll do it. And you know what? I'm fine with that. That's Waze for you. Okay, one of the interesting things I asked Sundar about was Project LaMDA.
Mm-hmm.
So this is weird. They went on stage and they demonstrated a little bit more. Every year they get a little better with understanding context and conversation with AI, and Assistant gets better as a result.
Yeah.
But they literally used information from the internet to create a character that you can then speak to and have a conversation with. So it's kind of like deepfake with audio and information. So basically you go, and they used Pluto and a paper airplane. So you could walk up. You could just go, hey, Project LaMDA, let me talk to Pluto. And Pluto goes, hi, I'm Pluto. What do you want to know? And you go, Pluto, what's it like being so far from the sun? And Pluto goes, oh, I'm just an ice ball. And it knows everything about Pluto.
Tell me what I would see if I visited.
You would get to see a massive canyon, some frozen icebergs, geysers, and some craters.
And it was really interesting to see that. And the first place my brain went was like, all right, this reminds me of deepfakes. How far are they going to push this? What are you going to be doing with Project LaMDA in the future? Am I going to be able to talk to Elvis? Because they know everything about Elvis. Can I ask about Elvis's controversial past and it'll give me an answer from something that Google knows about?
It's a
Elvis?
Regular conversation everyone has with their friends. Yeah.
I don't know. And maybe there's living people you want to like have conversations with, even though you can't. But then also it's going to give answers that living person might not give. So I don't know. I felt like it was a really, as Sundar put it, they gave the most benign examples, which is like, what's it like to be a paper airplane? Oh, I'm sure like a 9-year-old would want to have that conversation. But Project LaMDA to me immediately goes to like, all right, you can simulate a conversation with anything. What's it like being, I don't know, some crazy person?
He was very adamant about saying how it's still just research and it's not like necessarily a final product. But like you said, I wonder what is going to be that final product. And maybe we look back to something like, what was the name of the like assistant that could make you a dinner reservation or?
Oh, Google Assistant. It was just inside of Assistant. It would let you like, it would call a restaurant for you and reserve a table if it couldn't do it through OpenTable or whatever other reservation.
Didn't that project have like a name?
Probably did, and it didn't. Duplex. There you go.
Okay. Cool.
Duplex, and they've made adjustments to Duplex since then. But Sundar said it's just to make conversation better with Assistant, and also for better context, so understanding things inside of the rest of the web. For example, if I ask about, and YouTube kind of does this, but if you search a tutorial on YouTube, like how to change the filter in your sink or something, or your refrigerator, Google will pull up a YouTube video for you, and then it will pull up little brackets for a section inside the video that's most relevant to your search.
I've missed this completely.
It's really useful sometimes. Like because you know how a tutorial will open with, hi, my name is, please subscribe, blah, 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 blah. And by the time you get to 2.5 minutes, you're like, I didn't need to watch any of this. I just needed the thing. So it'll tell you, watch from 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes for the thing you searched for, which is pretty useful already.
Wait. When did they start doing this?
This was years ago for me. Every time I search, I look up a lot of tutorials and how-tos and things like that.
And it auto plays in that bracket, or just
Yep. You hit the play button and it starts right from the beginning of the bracket. So if you search for just the right thing, which is sort of a how-to, it will get really good at that.
Do you think that's ever affected any of your videos on like searching for iPhone 12 camera and like it would bring up your iPhone video and then just bracket the camera section?
I don't think my videos are specific enough to that, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like LaMDA would watch the video and be able to deliver that sort of information. Because I give chapters in my videos now, which I'm sure they can already look at, but I think this is something they could do better.
I'm learning more from this than
that was cool to see. I think it'll get better. So we'll just wonder what they're going to let us use and have conversations with.
And hopefully it doesn't get too creepy.
Yeah. I mean,
there's a lot of creep potential on LaMDA.
I have accepted that my deep fake ability is extremely high and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, you've already had videos of you singing songs and stuff like that. And while we thoroughly enjoy them in the office, they are kind of
just
weird.
If you just think about like what types of people will be the easiest to deepfake. People who have a lot of high resolution videos of them online, like the president, because he's photographed and videoed from every angle, or people who voluntarily upload 8K videos of themselves from here to here on the internet.
Didn't Dave do a video where he did you and Lou? Yeah, he deepfaked himself as you and Lou from Unbox.
Oh man, I barely remember that.
I'll have to find it.
But just as deepfake technology gets better and better, they're just going to have more and more information to pull from. Like you have a decade of videos of the front of my face and high resolution audio of me talking, saying like thousands and thousands of words. And this podcast is just even more of that. So that's I've just accepted that, I think. All right, a couple more things from I/O. Google and Samsung merging Wear OS and Tizen on a new smartwatch software experience. It's cool. It looked really good. Yeah. But there's no hardware yet.
No. I
really want to see the hardware.
I think like one of the main questions I get asked by people who know I work here is like, is there going to be a new Google Watch? Like, when are we getting a Google Watch? And, this isn't necessarily a Google Watch, but we're seeing Samsung, who a lot of people really, really enjoy their watches, and them coming together, which hopefully means something's coming in the future. And it has potential as well. They're saying it's going to have improved battery life, faster loading times for apps, smoother animations. It also makes developers' lives way easier because now you just have one platform to develop on between two of them.
That's important.
And then there's also the other thing they mentioned was standalone Google Maps without the need of a cell phone, which is awesome. And then Spotify's got offline downloads for music. So this sounds like really, really good things if you use your watch for fitness and you're going for runs and you don't, have your phone with you to stay connected to. But like you said, no hardware. I mean, Samsung's been doing great with hardware. I think there's some talk of maybe a new Google Watch, but when is there not talk of a new Google Watch coming out of nowhere?
Yeah, but they've been rumbling for a while, and I feel like this is the year for them to do it, especially if Pixel happens the way we think Pixel's going to happen, which is they have their own silicon and they're starting to vertically integrate more, and they launch a watch alongside it. Like, that would all sort of make sense this year. I guess every year it doesn't happen. It makes even more sense for them to do it that year, but I'm just saying, I think this is a good year for that. I also, every time I review the Apple Watch, like to look on the other side of the fence and see if there's anything anywhere close. And I reviewed the OnePlus Watch lately, and it's not close. So, seriously, yeah, I'm excited for this. Cameras being aware of different skin tones. I really was interested in this one. So, photography. How far back do I go with this? How deep do I go? Photography in standard cameras is pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of computation happening. Smartphone cameras with computational photography make a lot of adjustments and smart decisions based on the data that the sensor gathers. So they'll take a bunch of exposures and do different, merging of different areas based on the exposure. So highlights will use part of the exposure and shadows will come from a different shot, and faces. And then they start to get even more intense, where they'll take the frame where you're smiling, where the background is empty because there's no lady walking blurred in the background. So they're starting to merge realities into one frame. So the photos that come out of our smartphones are actually representative of the development that goes into them. And something at least I've always noticed, is a lot of smartphones have trouble, especially on the selfie camera, with darker skin tones, especially when there's a lot of bright objects around. You'll just sort of become a shadow. And so specifically on Google on stage, they decided and announced that they would be adjusting for darker skin tones and trying to make those more accurate, specifically because people with darker skin didn't feel correctly represented in their photos. And this is weird because it's just something I accepted for a while. I was like, smartphone cameras are just going to do the best they can for the average skin tone, which is much lighter, and that's just the way it is. And if my skin tone's darker than that, I'm just going to look not quite right in photos, and that's just something I've just accepted. And so Google making that conscious adjustment, and I hope to see it actually in action pretty soon, was really cool.
Yeah, a couple things I'm interested in is one, how well it does when then there are multiple skin tones. I can only assume they're not doing this to just be recognize one person in the photo has darker skin and then adjusts everything around it. I'm assuming they're just going to be able to adjust parts of photos in
Tone
order
mapping.
to correctly, expose everything. I'm really excited, especially if this comes out this year. My favorite video every year is the smartphone bracket. And
The blind smartphone camera test.
Exactly.
Yep.
And one of the first shots we always do is a photo of you, and it's generally in a pretty well lit, could consider bright space. And it's always the most wildly different because phones from all over the place just completely have their own, a mind of their own in terms of how they're going to expose things. I mean, it gets to the point where I think iPhone last year or 2 years ago just like blew everything. Just
That's
like,
where you see computational photography at work. It's like the iPhone has decided that it wants to turn a certain thing white, or it needs to turn a certain thing neutral. And once it's decided that, the whole rest of the frame just sort of falls in step with that decision.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like a lot of the ones that were taking the best photos were just the ones not getting thrown off by too many different, stimuli in the photo. So yeah, one of the earliest photos we always take was one of the most telling.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe this
we'll see how
it just
it
rolls
does,
out in a Google Photos update sometime soon. This is the other thing about I/O is almost every single thing they announced on stage was like coming later this year, coming early next year, coming in the upcoming months. Like we didn't really get dates for any of these things, which is a little worrying.
Some of them you just feel like it's you'll never see this again for the rest of your life. Like the
we keep
chain
referencing
link fence.
we keep referencing the chain link fence, which was a software Google Photos feature.
2017, I think.
It was announced on stage and it had a big wow moment on stage, and then it just straight up never happened.
Just never.
I have photos of chain link fences on my phone still.
Saving them for when it comes out.
Someday they'll get rid of the fence, but it was announced and never happened. So I guess that's the nature of software, but that's interesting to me to see how that goes. Another one. Do you want to talk about this one? Google Photos animating.
Before we get to Android 12, I just like threw this in. They had that like small section of like animated Google Photos where it would take your photos and pretty much animate them. And I just want to say it was really weird and creepy. And
just to paint a picture, it's another just like blurring of reality.
Is it taking like a live photo and kind of doing, or is it doing the thing where it like, how you can take a singular photo and kind of like distort the perspective a little bit and it looks like somebody's moving? Is that? Yeah.
So this is basically taking advantage of the fact that most people actually take a bunch of photos of a single scene. And that's kind of the way it goes. Like a bunch of people get in front of a wall and you just fire. And you take like 8, 9, 10 photos and you only really need one of them. But Google's noticed people don't really use the rest. And if they look at all of those photos, there might be like a pattern of something. Someone flips their hair, someone, walks into the photo, something cool happens, and then they'll just make an animation out of that. And they've kind of been doing that in Google Photos. I think I have a video or a slideshow of Mac doing something because I take like 12 photos of Mac trying to get him to look at the camera. And then he looks at the camera and then you have this like 20 photo long sequence of him not looking at the camera. Now I'm just going to have an automatic Google animation of Mac just looking at the camera like that, which is a little creepy.
It's going to be really funny when those ones like bug out and it's like 5 pictures, but the 5th one or like one in the middle is Mac like whipping his head to the wrong side and just like the animation is Mac turning his head and then it just like distorts melting completely the wrong direction.
Man, yeah.
That'll be... If that ever happens, it's just going to have a lot of meme potential, I feel like.
True.
And some people are going to think it's really cool and then show their friends once and never use it again. I think I would chalk that in that category.
Seems likely. But one of the biggest parts that we were interested in is Android 12. We finally got our look at Android 12, which is not named after a suite again. It's just Android 12. It's the newest version. But it is, I think we can safely say, the biggest overhaul in the visual style and the look of Android since the beginning, which is really interesting. There's also a bunch of new features added in, but I feel like we really haven't seen Android make big visual steps for a while. And every time I talk about this in videos, it's always like, all right, here's my top 5 new features of Android, 10 dot whatever, 11 dot whatever. Keep in mind, it's very mature and there's not a whole lot to change here because the earlier versions of Android would just go hollow and then, material design, and they would just change up all the time until they figured out their thing. So we've kind of been in a groove for a while. So this is a big change for Android. So let's go ahead. We actually have David sitting over here right off camera. If you want to slide in here.
Hello, boys.
Oh.
Welcome to the table.
I'm here.
I don't know how you got here so
Have
fast.
you been there the whole time?
I don't really know how I got here either. I was actually in the studio, and now suddenly I'm here.
It's a teleporting machine.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Yes.
All right, David, tell us about these conversations you had and what you found out. Because obviously Android 12 looks really different. I'm not sure if they have reasons why. Do they even talk about that, or does it just happen?
Yes. There are reasons why. There is so much to go over here. Real quick, I want to give people do you guys know why material design existed in the first place?
No.
I feel like I have my general thought on it, which is it's material. It's supposed to feel like part of reality. Like if you almost like the skeuomorphic theory, where the materials that overlap in real life feel like the materials that overlap in a digital space, and it tactically makes sense to you.
Right. Yeah. So back in 2014, when they made material design, it was kind of supposed to be this guideline for developers to understand how to make digital interfaces that felt like materials, right? Because the definition of making something intuitive is that you already know how to use it. And if you already know how to use paper, so why shouldn't you know how to use a digital interface? So that's why if you look in Google Keep or any other Google app that uses a material kind of interface, it's all these floating things that are over the top of each other, and they have hamburger menus and they move over each other. But at this point, material design, it's a little bit outdated, just because like you mentioned specifically, skeuomorphism, right? That was a thing that was very popular for a long time in kind of building technological interfaces. But over time, we've kind of gotten to this point where people are feeling a little bit disconnected from their technology, right? Everything feels a little bit industrial. You look at our iMac Pros and our Mac Pros, and everything is just very metal box, right? So anyway, like you mentioned, I talked to Liam Spradlin, who is a design advocate at Google for material design. He's been working on the material design team for a long time, and I kind of talked to him about okay, what was the motivation towards this move towards Material U? What are you guys trying to really get out of it? And what should people be excited about for it? So right now, I'm going to play a little game with you guys if you're down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to play 3 clips that from the conversation that I had with Liam. And there's 3 pillars of Material U that they really made in order to kind of be the foundations of what they want this to be. So we're going to play the clips, and then I want you guys to guess what these pillars are.
Okay, 3 pillars.
Does winner get anything?
I'll make a meme of you.
Sweet. Well, that's going to happen anyways. But
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Adam, if you can take that away.
Sure. I think that happens constantly throughout the process. And there's a lot of stuff like that from previous iterations of material as well. I think something that comes to mind is doing explorations with a few folks of what one interface might look like across a range of scenarios, and pushing, for instance, the layout of controls on a screen, or the placement or the size, and pushing those as far as you possibly can until it's very obviously broken.
Yeah.
And then right. Figuring out why it's very obviously broken and trying to bring it back to a place that's still doing something new but completely functional.
Are we guessing now what that theme is?
Yeah, let's guess now. So based on everything he said, there's a lot of, it's a lot of words.
Yeah.
But what do you think that theme was?
Sounded just like responsiveness between mobile and tablet and desktop, having this understandable flow between different
continuity,
sizes, continuity.
So you said sizes. Sizes is one of the big pillars that I grabbed from this conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to play the next one.
Something that I realized recently was something that Matthias said in the presentation, was this thing about form follows feeling. And I had to think about that for a while and to understand how that works with the system. And I think it's, we're probably familiar with the rhetorical device of form follows function, or, you know, debating the relationship between form and function, like the form has to accommodate the function and is therefore always informed by the function. But then after you've formed it, the function can change.
So, okay, yeah, I know it's a lot. It's a lot. What would you guys say this pillar is?
Form, function.
Function was the word he said the most. Yeah.
Form
shape,
versus function. Form following function.
Yeah, so form, shape.
Form
right?
over function.
Yeah.
Function of form.
Function of X.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So that one's shape. I know this is a yeah. I've tried to. It's a mini game.
Size.
We're playing
we
a
got
mini
sizes
game.
and shapes.
All right, we got size, shape, and then there's one more that we're gonna play, and then we're gonna really dive into this.
Sure. I think from a color perspective, color expression is something that we've always been trying to build on in material. And I think that, like, as we approached this from the mindset of creating something that's adaptive and something that changes for every user, like, that seemed like a huge potential component of that. Sure. So typically, when you're designing an experience, there are accessibility guidelines for the contrast that two colors should have against each other. And these guidelines change based on whether it's like body size text or large text, or even if it's something like an icon or a decorative element or something like that. And what we found is that extracting colors and generating tonal palettes for them based on the hue values and based on the hue values was not consistent enough to allow us to get this universal approach to extracting colors from pretty much anything and applying that to UI. But we did find that measuring the luminosity of that got us to a place where we could reliably generate like how many ever tonal palettes it is and select certain spots within those palettes that would work together in an interface. I think like behind the scenes, when the colors are being generated, there's dozens of colors. So it could be 40, 50, 60, because we're extracting like a certain type of color from the image, like the colors that are salient to the image, and then also ones that might be accents or secondary kind of a secondary level of saliency, I guess. And then from there, extrapolating those into each their own tonal palettes and then drawing from those in various ways.
Okay, so third
color.
guess, the color. This one was the easier one. This one was the easier one.
Smart.
Yeah. So okay, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. But based on our conversation, these are the three pillars that I kind of pulled out about Material U. Right? We've got size, shape, and color as like the main reasons that Google wanted to like. The main things Google wanted to bring to Android, right? So a big part of Android 12 is, if you've seen it, everything's big.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
Huge.
Yeah, huge even. And Liam told me that, like, you know, the settings menu, the quick settings menu, there's the clock on the front of the phone that when the display's off. Massive. But it feels good, right?
I would say it's the number one thing in our Discord that people were talking about when it got announced was like, oh, everything is so big. I don't know how I feel about that. And it's very different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very forward-facing thing. And what Liam told me is that, like, they decided they wanted to kind of, like, mess with things until they broke and then understand why they were broken and then kind of pull it back. And so they were messing with size, and they were like, this still feels fine.
Yeah, this is interesting to me because I saw that is also, we can probably talk more about color in a bit, but the number one thing I noticed was with the size of like the buttons and the spacing of how far apart things were, is I always feel like there was this subtle, maybe it was even said before, this subtle mission to get rid of unnecessary empty space. And the more they had like blank white space in between buttons or in between text, the more it felt like things were wasted. So they wanted to like put an icon there or tighten things up just a little bit so you could see more, get more information out of this big screen phone you have. And so this pretty radical flip of that switch to like, whatever, we don't need to maximize all this space. We want to give you big touch targets, big understandable information. And if you got to scroll, then you got to scroll. is really fascinating. I wonder if it has to do with just the fact that our phones are bigger than they used to be, and you don't need to maximize the amount of stuff on that screen. But also, it doesn't look terrible.
Yeah,
So-
I think it's a combination of things, right? Like there's that almost that aspect of digital well-being where what we've always wanted to do with screens is just maximize information density, right? That's always been kind of the goal, is just like, how do we get as much information on a screen as possible, especially on something that's in our pocket? It's like, for some reason, there's this like linear idea that the more information you have, the more productive you can be. But now we're kind of scaling these things back to like, what if we just want to focus on doing one thing, right? And so the quick settings menu is a good example. It's massive.
Yep.
You have 6 options instead of 20, but you generally only need to use like one of those 6 anyway.
Yeah, that is a good point. When I open quick settings, it's not because I'm here to go flip 5 different settings.
Yeah.
I'm here to swipe down and hit like airplane mode and leave. Or I'm here to swipe down and hit the flashlight button for like 5 seconds and turn it back off and leave. So having a huge, easily findable icon and touch point is theoretically better form and function than having 9 of them clustered next to each other just for the sake of information density. So I guess I get that.
The way you explained it kind of made, because as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about how I generally set up my computer or my phone, and I'm the kind of person who drags everything to the smallest size possible. And I think like my phone, the whole front of it's completely blank basically, and just has a couple apps on it. But when I look at these new designs for Material U, I like them despite them being so big. And the more I think about that, you mentioning focusing on something, I think the reason I dislike having my whole page filled with apps on my phone or maybe big icons on my desktop is like, it's too much. It's too cluttered. There's too many things that are distracting. And when I make things very small, I can almost ignore it.
Right.
If I only have 4 icons on my phone, I'm focused on those things.
Yeah.
Those are what I want. So,
and like
the
Marquez
focus
said,
aspect.
like he said, like when you bring down quick settings, you only are generally going to do
I'm
one thing.
shooting for something.
If you on your home screen you only have 4 apps, maybe those are the 4 apps you generally use anyway.
Did you ever have a phase where you had like no icons on your home screen at all?
Yeah.
I had
You mean my life right now?
Do you currently, are you a 0 app person
Where-
right now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to just describe this. I don't know if I can find a video where I did this because I don't even know if it's on my own channel, but I had a setup on my phone where it was just a clock, right? And there were, obviously you could swipe up and you knew that certain gestures would like do certain things like open the app drawer so I could get to apps. But then I went so far as like mapping certain blank widgets to do different things.
Oh,
So I would touch
really?
the clock, it would open the clock. I would touch the
yeah.
top corner because I knew that would open the weather.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to have to see it.
Yeah, I
It would
know.
just be blank, but I
Yeah.
would just go up there to the weather, or I
Yeah.
could like swipe over and get to my contacts. So yeah, I had that set up for a while, and it felt really good. It was really clean and minimal. And then I think I got a new phone, and I was like, this whole setup was a little over the top. And then I just went back to just putting icons.
It's
on
like
the
a
home screen.
chore to keep things clean. I feel like every time I set up a new computer, I hope I'm not the only one that does this, but like completely blank.
Yeah.
Desktop completely blank. And then you slowly just start saving things in there.
Mhm.
And then it gets really messy. And you're like, okay. And then you make a folder called desktop. And then you drag everything into that. So I
Random.
only have one icon there. And
Uh-huh.
then 6 months later,
Yeah.
messy. New desktop, and drag all of that, including the old desktop folder,
Oh god.
into that, and it's just spirals out of control.
Yeah, I haven't done the desktop everything folder, but I do consciously decide time to clean this up,
Yeah.
and I will delete a bunch of stuff
Yeah.
and make it cleaner. Yeah.
No, it's like real quick. It's funny, like you mentioned, like making your home screen as basic as possible, and then like adding complexity to systems in order to like quick launch something with 3 taps of a button or like hitting a space on the, just like, yeah, it's this weird obsession that we have. And so if that's the case, if we're going to be doing that, why not just make things bigger? Because then it looks cleaner.
It does look clean,
And you still have the same functionality. So I don't want to spend too much time on shape or on size, but I think that's a big thing. And then also, Material U is supposed to be kind of a universal design language that works across devices.
So across tablets, phones, watch, all that stuff.
Watch, yeah. I mean,
Possibly.
but the Nest Hub, obviously.
Okay.
If you look at Nest Hub right now, it almost has a Material U-ish look.
Yeah, a lot of big
icons,
yeah.
and it's the same idea of like when you walk up to the Nest Hub, generally you're going to be using Google Assistant with your voice, but like just big things so you can see it across the room. You can turn a light on. You can do this. A light switch is a big thing on the wall, right? It's not like it's this little tiny thing you gotta poke at. So it's just this way to like just kind of like stretch things to the biggest they can make them, and if they feel uncomfortable, scale it back. But surprisingly, people are okay with things feeling big.
Yeah.
Anyway, so second pillar,
Shapes.
This is one that I find really interesting.
I feel like shapes are very subjective.
Yeah.
You either
Very
like it or you don't.
subjective. Yep.
Yeah. That's just me.
Yeah, but you had mentioned earlier the skeuomorphism, right?
Yep.
So when Google made material design, design has kind of always been about like keeping similar. Design is basically, if you have a design language, it means that everything should kind of fit into that language. Everything should feel cohesive. And the easiest way to do that is to make things skeuomorphic. So if you look at like widgets in old Android before they redesigned the widgets, they're like rectangles with some more rectangles inside. They're super basic, squared off.
I remember the leather notebook days of like you'd open the notebook app and it would just be like a leather notebook on the top and you could write on the lines of the paper. Yeah. Fun times.
So like this obsession with skeuomorphism, but this is another thing that kind of I think plays into the like our tech no longer, like it doesn't feel human, it feels industrial, right? And we, especially in the last year with like the pandemic and everything, everyone's started to feel like very disconnected from their tech. They feel like it's almost creating like a negative headspace for them. And like a good way to like make tech feel more natural to you is to try to make it feel more human. And what are humans? We're really freaking messy. We are not perfect. We have stuff on the floor in our rooms, our desks or whatever. So like if you look at the new widgets, for example, that Google is adding to Material U, I think is one of the coolest updates because they are taking this skeuomorphic idea and they are just throwing it in the garbage can. Like,
basically, yeah.
Completely. If you look at some of these animations Andrew's got on his computer here, the clock, the home screen clock widget that they added is, I think, one of my favorite things.
It looks really
it's
nice.
Like,
This is...
okay, like Marquez did say, shape is
It's got a little IKEA
subjective
feel to it. I feel like
This is definitely
No?
something
Was
that's
it
gonna.
not?
No, it's gonna take me some time to get used
I
to.
feel like
this.
Brandon would be big into this. This
I'm-
feels very Brandon.
I'm big into it. I like if you think of like this is like the form follows function follows feeling thing that they were talking about that Matthias was talking about.
Mhm.
So like obviously, okay, if you have you need a function, you say I need a clock. The form of the clock, the most basic form of making a clock is making it a circle, right? Because that is literally how you need a circle so that you can measure things against degrees. But the form of a circle is not super human. It's very skeuomorphic. So then if you say, okay, let's take that form and kind of add a human element into it, this is the kind of perfect example of that, of like adding kind of this weird sun shape.
Yeah.
Marquez looks like he has some opinions.
It almost
on
feels like a
that.
toy, like a snow.
Okay. The point you made earlier about tech being more industrial, I actually really like the clean, minimal hardware aesthetic.
Robot.
Like when you
You're a
look at
robot.
No, I mean, like you look at, maybe it's just because it's a work thing, but like this desk being perfectly rectangular or being very thin. I refused to get a certain standing desk, even though it was probably just as good, because the front of it was like this sloping curve that you would like be in the curve and it would curve around you and it's this human natural shape. I was like, nah, just give me a rectangle.
I think, was that one of those gaming desks?
No, it was like an up desk or something. And like the Pro Display XDR being this perfect rectangle with like the solid straight back edges. Like I like my UI and my interface to be a certain level of clean.
Mm-hmm.
And so this Android 12 aesthetic definitely deviates from the typical clean aesthetic that I'm used to. It is still pretty flat.
Here's a
It's
question for you
clean.
though.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you though. Like, clean could work for anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
But weird shapes that you get to like dictate yourself and decide like maybe I want this oval, maybe I want this to be a star, maybe I want this to be this. Would you say that adds a level of like personal touch to it? I mean,
yeah,
I totally get what you mean, because I also love the way the Pro Display XDR looks, and I do like industrial looking things. But for things that we use like every single day, like our smartphone, like I'm of the opinion that like adding as much personal touch to that as possible. And I think that's why people customize their home screen so much.
I agree. I just do all of that personal touch with color.
Okay.
And so I really like the color part, which we're about to get into.
Yes.
But I would much rather have a bunch of rectangles with the exact same radius and let me change the colors of each of the things so I can identify function.
Yeah.
Rather than just squiggling all sorts of random different radii and shapes in there.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get to color, I do want to say that they did mention that like while the shapes are weird and kind of like feel sort of random, they're quirky. They still do follow design principles. So like
I would call this super clean. It's just it's quirkier
like
clean.
Yeah, it's that in between of stretching to something to where it almost feels uncomfortable, but then still using like the same radii, the same, that clock widget has the same curve.
But it's not the same radii. That's the thing. Like it's flat but not clean. Like I'm just looking at this.
Are we looking at different?
If I look at this,
what I'm looking at.
So like these icons, circles. This weather widget, not quite a circle. This circle widget, also squiggly, not this. So these are all fundamentally different shapes and different radii. This is a different radii
you're saying
rectangle.
like everything on the entire screen should be okay. So you're saying the cohesiveness between all the different widgets.
Yeah,
I think you have the ability to do that if you want, though.
Okay,
right. So that's kind of they're just introducing a lot of different things, and also like the widgets, they're adding so much functionality to the widgets. Thank God, like Android widgets haven't been updated for so long.
The stock Google ones.
Yeah, the stock
because the third-party ones, I always go straight to the third-party ones, and there's tons. So I'm happy to see Google update theirs.
But I think Google was very pressured by Apple because now that Apple added widgets and they're actually pretty good.
How about that?
Yeah, right.
How about Apple doing widgets?
I know.
Okay.
Yeah. But they added a lot of the cool things to the widgets, like there's so many different elements they added, like these radio boxes, and just like you can do so many crazy things. And Google is trying to update. We'll see if it actually happens. They're trying to update the widgets for all of their core apps and kind of use them as examples of the different things that you can do now with all the new widget APIs they're adding, which is cool. So, okay, that's good. Last one, and I think the one that probably sticks out like the most, if not the second most to people, is color, right? I think the core fundamental part of Android 12 that I think is going to make it feel very personal is this new color palette thing that the system is building for you. And if you think about it, your wallpaper is like the first thing that you do to personalize your phone and the most personal thing that you do to personalize your phone, right? Almost every single person has a different wallpaper.
Change your wallpaper, change your life.
That's exactly. I saw your tweet the other day. Exactly.
If you think about it, like we were just talking before about minimalism on desktops and stuff, and that's probably because all of us really enjoy the wallpaper that we're posting on that and want less clutter taking over that wallpaper.
Yeah. Yeah. So what Google is doing here is they're basically they derived this algorithm that takes the like base colors from your wallpaper and then it derives a palette from that.
Yeah. So it's like we're looking at your wallpaper, finding what the color palette is of that wallpaper, and then making your system theme that color palette.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Would love to see it work on different images and wallpapers. Like I want to take a picture of the studio and see what it decides the color palette is. Super interesting to me.
So
I like this.
Something really cool about it too is they were messing with this, right? They wanted to make this universal algorithm that could work for any photo. And at first they were like, okay, when we're developing this algorithm that creates this palette, like how do we decide like what colors are based on the palette? Like, okay, you can take like a color that's almost exactly the same as the primary color in the wallpaper. You can take a complementary color because it pops against it. And they're still doing that, but they don't want to just have like two colors for the theme, right? And by the way, this color palette gets applied to your entire system theme, which is awesome. And you can change it. You can change it manually, but it's like an automatic thing. So your quick settings will change color. Yeah. Like that clock on the front will change color. So the cool thing is that they're taking like a complementary color, like something like orange if you have a blue wallpaper, and that will be sort of an accent. But the way that they're creating like the main color palette is they're using luminosity. So instead of changing hues, because hues, if you were to like, that's physically shifting the color, right? That doesn't always work universally across like every single image. But changing the luminosity of a color, just making something brighter or something darker, automatically adds contrast. So that's something that ended up working for them. And they were stretching this like forever. They finally came across this luminosity thing. If you look at this animation of like showing the clock on the front of the display, and you think like, how do they always make sure that the clock looks good on this photo?
Yeah, it's got contrast.
Because it takes the primary color and then it adds a little bit of luminosity. So if you add brightness or darkness to a color, it adds contrast naturally, which is really cool.
Yeah, so it matches, but you can still read it without it getting lost in
Exactly.
any of the colors. Yeah, it's really smart.
And it just like applies it to the system theme. And I think this idea of like making your device feel more personal to you, color is such a good way to do that, because your wallpaper is like the first and most important personal touch that you can add.
Yeah. Can I ask a personal question?
Sure. I didn't know there was that kind of podcast, but okay.
How often do you change your wallpaper?
I wanted to ask this also.
And what is your wallpaper? Is it an abstract? Is it a photo of a thing or a person?
I knew this was
or-
going to come out eventually today.
I'm curious. I have a bunch of like hard rules for my own wallpapers. I change my wallpaper maybe once every 3 months on my
Yeah.
phone, something like that.
Yeah.
And it is always abstract. It is
Yeah.
always abstract. It's never a photo. I've
Okay.
always found those
I
too
don't do
busy and too
photos, yeah.
contrasty.
Interesting.
And I always like to roast my sister for having, in the past, she's had a photo of herself as her wallpaper. And I like roasting her for that because I think you should just not do that. But I'm curious what you guys do.
Yeah, okay, so obviously when I was reviewing a new phone every single week, I changed my wallpaper every time I would set up a new phone.
Right.
Just because, you know, people in the comment sections always want to know what your wallpaper is, and it's like
Yeah.
just fun. I tend to use like photos that I find on Reddit, the film photography subreddit.
Mhm.
And then also photos that some of my friends take that are great photographers.
So photos.
So like right now I am using this photo from my friend Brian, who just took this. I don't know. You probably
I don't
can't
know if
see
you
it on
can
the
see
camera.
that. We can screenshot it.
I could take a
describe it.
screen recording, but it's just a photo of like a desert. And
Now on an iPhone,
Well,
since all the
you can-
icons have to be at the top
I
half, do you think about that?
Yeah.
yeah, and I freaking hate it.
Part of my
I-
reason I can't do iPhone.
I can't-
I feel like.
I really, really, really hate iOS a lot.
That's
Like,
one of the biggest problems with wallpapers in iOS is 90% of photos don't work because the
You
most
can't
important
see
part of the
it.
photo is at the top behind all your icons.
Yeah.
So if you do a photo of a person, their face is somewhere in the icons. It just doesn't work. So
yeah.
you do something else. There's also one that I found that specifically adds a blur to the image. So it's not just a straight photo, but you import it into this app, adds like a slight blur. You can adjust it.
just it makes it a little more
Make that your wallpaper.
flat.
Then the icons pop a little bit. It's a little
Right.
more flat and it looks like more of a render, but it's
Yeah.
still your photo.
Yeah.
That could be cool.
Yeah.
What was your...
Let's
Yeah,
do it.
what's
Wait,
yours?
for audio listeners. Let's just. We'll have one other person describe the other person's.
Oh, yeah, that's
I'll
fun.
describe
Okay.
David's here
Okay.
real quick. I'm gonna go lock screen first because that's the cleanest on iPhone.
Oh yeah.
All right, so desert foreground with a lot of really cool lines coming towards you at the camera, and then in the background some mountains, and you have a skyline and a moon.
The moon,
that are, like really cool moon.
The moon is important to me because you can, in between the icons, it fits in between the icons, so you can still see it.
Yeah.
But what I really
do
like
it pretty
about
frequently.
what I like
so.
about the front or the lock screen is when the time comes up, it's perfectly like on the horizon
Yeah.
and looks really clean. Then again, my issue with iPhone is once you go into the icons,
I know
you
it looks
lose
so bad.
everything. It's still nice that you still get these lines on the bottom and the sand coming at you. But yeah, then it goes
it
to
ruins the
icons
whole
on
photo.
top,
Okay.
and all those notifications too.
All right, I will
drive me
describe
wild.
Marquez's.
This is... I've used this one for a while. Which
Okay.
Mac OS wallpaper is this? This is or iOS. I don't even know.
I think it was Mac
iOS
OS
on your
I think that was
OnePlus.
that was Mac OS right before the current one.
Yeah, I think it's a Big Sur wallpaper.
Yeah.
Great wallpaper to me
Yeah.
because it separates my highs and lows. It's abstract, so
Yeah.
it's not too crazy.
Yeah.
Here's my lock screen. Got my time up there in the blue. Easy.
Mhm.
Got the red, which matches the red.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of stripes. It's
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah,
I think you've actually become quite known for these style of wallpapers.
yeah,
too.
colorful. hard line, very contrasty lines, and then
Yeah, but I'm totally cool with like adding a blur to this or having something like sort of clean and like simple.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I start going like a photo, there'll be like a tree in it that's like too busy, and then the icon over the tree doesn't quite overlap the tree the right way, and then it's just all off. And
Can
I
I
can't
say
do it.
that Google search bar drives me insane?
It does a little bit. I've got the
I
tiny
can't
Google search
stand
bar.
it.
I want to search by hitting the G, which doesn't bring up the search thing. So I would have to have a bigger search bar.
I need it to
actually
across,
hit the search thing to open the keyboard straight away. So that does annoy me sometimes, but I do like keeping it.
Yeah, not a fan of that.
Okay, I'm going to describe Andrew's wallpaper, and I think this is hilarious because I use this as my Windows 10 desktop wallpaper.
Is that
for
a Firewatch wallpaper?
4 years.
Is it? It's like Firewatch style. I don't know if it's
Firewatch
specifically...
style. This one and the one that has the deer in it are like.
Yeah, that might actually be the one with the deer. It's just because
it might be, but it's
closer,
cut off.
Because I think my desktop at home has the same.
So
one.
you know what's funny about this? This is almost a combination between like the extreme cleanness and colorfulness of Marquez's, and then a little bit more detail that like is in mine.
Mm-hmm.
It frames the time.
It frames the time very well.
Yeah,
the time could be like the
that.
moon.
Does it bother you that you can't get rid of the Google widget at the very top? Or do you use that date and weather?
I actually really like how it looks there, to be honest. It's like nice white contrast on the darker sky. And then, I mean, weather right there. I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah. So anyway, a little off topic.
Wait,
but,
want to guess how long I've had this wallpaper for? Because
since you
very
got,
different.
since you
than
You've
got
had
the
that for a while. At least
I've
a year.
had this since I got my Pixel 3.
Wow.
And I just transferred it. Same wallpaper.
Yeah.
I've attempted to change it, and I look at it once after. I'm like, oh, this is really nice. I set it all up, and then I like turn my phone on, and I'm like, whose phone is this? And then I just change it.
No,
back.
exactly. Like,
change your wallpaper, change your life.
that's
My life hasn't
exactly because
changed in a bit.
I change my wallpaper so infrequently that like it feels so good when I change my wallpaper. I feel like I got a new phone basically for one image.
I don't even change the layout that much, but when I do
crazy.
change my wallpaper, it changes the whole mood of when I use the phone. If I'll do like a darker, like simpler wallpaper, I'll be like, it's all business. Like my screen on time is getting cut in half. Like I'm not using my phone today.
Yeah, those people that just have the black OLED wallpapers and nothing else. One of my friends is like that. He's a maximalist and he just has icons everywhere and he just uses a black OLED wallpaper.
not a
and I'm just
fan.
like, look at Adam right now, Adam.
Oh, I'd pass out. I can't.
Okay, and then something I want to bring up too is like if you think about this, what I think is kind of cool about Material U is that if you look at Google's product stack, right, they've kind of they developed a hardware look over the last few years, and it started with the original Google Home. Looks like an air freshener, sits in your kitchen. It's white, so it blends into that white wall, kind of like the iMac, the bezel. And they kind of developed this like friendly. They use a lot of materials, like these fibers,
The
mesh fibers that are kind of like these bright, cheery colors. And they developed this like hardware design look, but the software design didn't really connect with that. It didn't really like, it was very different. It was just kind of like Android on top of that. But now, because luminosity, like when you bring up luminosity and you bring down luminosity, it skews towards pastels.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of pastel in Android 12. And a lot of the materials and fibers that they use in a lot of Google's hardware are pastel. You look at the new Google TV, pink pastel, blue pastel. You look at the Nest hubs, the fibers they used are pastel colors.
This is Apple's color scheme too. They've
I mean,
got
with
all
the
these
iMac,
pastels.
yeah.
iMacs, iPads, this laptop, all these like light green, light red.
And
so.
I think that might be just be a design trend in right now, but it's kind of cool that Google is finally starting to feel like their software is becoming more cohesive with the hardware it lives on. And that's something that, like, obviously Apple has done really well for a long time. They kind of developed that, but Google's have kind of always had this like separate hardware team, separate software team, but now it's feeling more cohesive. And then if you want to really look into the future, it's like they're doing Whitechapel now. So like to me, it looks like they have this master plan, and I know I'm probably like just projecting here, but like it feels like they have this master plan where they really want to create an ecosystem of products that feels cohesive, because traditionally they've just made a ton of random stuff that sort of works together sometimes, but now everything is kind of like merging. So it feels like they're moving towards kind of the Apple direction.
Yeah.
But either way, I think just kind of wrap up the Material U stuff. I think that Material U is like you said, one of the biggest changes they've made in a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
I think that they're going to stick with this design for a while because they haven't really changed anything significantly since like after they got off Hollow. You know, they moved off Hollow.
Hollow was a fun time.
It was.
Do you remember the Tron, like the Tron look of like that tablet, the zoom?
Yeah,
that was peak like Hollow.
Yeah, just like the light blue against black.
Yeah, Tron days.
It was great. So yeah, no, I mean, I think that's about it for Material U. But I personally am a big fan. I think we'll have to see how it plays out once we actually get this. And I should note also, the Material U that we see that we're talking about right now specifically is tailored to Pixel 6 or to Pixel, right? Okay. So just like Material Design was like a guideline to show developers how they could make their apps feel more natural, feel more like intuitive on devices, Material U is also sort of like that. Obviously, the widgets are going to feel very Material U all the time, but the stuff like the universal color palette across Android, like that's something that you have to add in as an API. So like whether or not these OEMs decide to implement a lot of this stuff is very up to them. It would be cool if we saw it more, but you know that if you get a Pixel, you're going to get this.
Yeah.
So...
And I'm really curious to see how the third-party apps and widgets update, and will they fall in line with this sort of squiggly, quirky look? We'll see, because I like my rectangular widgets right now. All right. Well, thank you, David, for talking to us about Material U, and we'll probably end up with an Android 12 video on the channel at some point with all the new features and everything. But I think it's a perfect segue to talking about the friendly-looking new iMac, M1 iMac. So let's talk about that.
All right. So M1 iMac. I gave it a glowing review when it first was announced. I love the design style. White bezels are my absolute favorite. But I have lightened up to it a little bit. I'll admit it looks good in some scenarios. It is not for me, but you're really amped to talk about it. So I'll let you take this one.
You know, that is the key word here. It is not for us.
No,
I think that is such an underrated thing when we talk about products, is like these are not hyper targeted, but a lot of these generalist seeming products are really for a certain demographic that does not include us.
It's funny because the demographic is probably more general, but it's hyper focused on the general demographic.
Right.
Does that
it's
make
like
sense?
When you watch like a children's video on YouTube, you're like, how does anyone watch this? It's not funny, it's not entertaining, but for the very large audience that it's for, it's great. Even for music, I feel like that's another. Anyway, so for this computer, the M1 iMac, it is, as Apple would probably describe it, a very basic, general, really capable and versatile all-in-one desktop computer.
Yeah.
Part of it, which is the part we're talking about the most, is the design, because basically when it comes down to it, it's the M1 again, just in a new dress, just in a new package. So we've talked about the M1 MacBook Pro, the M1 MacBook Air is the same chip, M1 Mac Mini is the same chip, and we'll talk about the M1 iPad in a minute. But ultimately, it's this same computer with a 24-inch 4.5K display and whatever design they wanted to make. So the design they chose was an 11.5 millimeter thin sliver of a metal desktop with a nice big chin, white bezels, and a not height adjustable stand. But the whole thing is like 10 pounds. So it's actually like...
It's great. I moved it. First of all, moving the old iMacs, despite how small they were, sucked because of how it like went down into a point. It was actually sharp to like move those around. And they weighed a good amount. I mean, it's a lot of computer in there for how small it is. But I just moved this one out of because we had to return our review unit. Mm-hmm. It's pretty crazy. It like really feels like you're just carrying a really big laptop with a weird stand coming out.
It's funny. I actually think I didn't say this in the video, but I should have. I think the pads at the bottom aren't sticky enough, because I feel like I bump the computer and it just slides over, and it's just too easy to slide. That thing it's very light. Our two most controversial observations about this iMac were the chin and the white bezel.
Yeah.
The white bezel, I feel like I at least understand.
Yes.
I fully get what they're going for, which is, okay, this is going to be a nice, friendly looking computer. It has a nice pastel look on the front, which is different from the dark color on the back. But if you're putting this in a room like a living room or a dining room or a kitchen or a bedroom or a random home office or something like that, 8 times out of 10, it's a white wall behind it. And it turns out that's typically the best way to look like not an industrial box, but like a nice, friendly, usable computer.
Yeah, a piece of the house rather than a piece of tech. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's the same reason why the new Nest has white bezels. It's the same reason why the new Nest Home Hub with the screen with the Google Assistant has white bezels. It's just because it's just a little more friendly looking. I think that'll probably be the case for a while. I would still, again, I'm not in the target demographic for this, so I would still prefer a dark bezel, but I am not getting this iMac for my house, so it doesn't matter what I think. It's not for me. The chin, on the other hand. Have you seen the iFixit teardown of this?
Oh, I have it open right now.
Okay.
It's really funny.
It's great. So the chin. So the iMac is sort of a legend for that chin. It's had that design of a screen at the top and a bit of a chin at the bottom since the original iMac, honestly, where it had the speakers underneath. Every single one has had some sort of a chin, including this new one. And if you look at the iFixit teardown, most of the computer is in that chin, and then most of behind the display is kind of empty actually, which leads me to believe, well, they intentionally kept the chin. They wanted the chin there. They could have definitely made it thicker and not had a chin, and they made a choice to make it super thin and keep the chin.
I'm trying to find a way to argue with that, but it's really hard because, like, literally, this teardown is like it just looks like a bunch of RAM sticks glued onto the back of a screen.
It's extremely well integrated. Yeah, the whole thing is at the bottom. It's like the M1 is there. There's no upgradable. You're not popping RAM in and out or anything. Like the speakers are all down there. Almost everything's in the bottom. The question is, should they have? And in my video, I suggest like people buying this who already have a thicker computer would have been totally fine with a 20 millimeter thick computer with no chin, and that would have looked way better and way less like a piece of tech than this new like extra chin on the bottom of the white bezel that now sticks out a little bit. You still have the pastel color of the stand it sits on, and that's a nice friendly color, and that's cool and everything.
Yeah,
but I
wonder if that is it, if it's that pop of color like to add in there to be a little more friendly, because you could almost argue, looking at the teardown, like if you look at the wiring that's going up to the webcam and a couple other components, you could argue that it being in the chin means more wires or longer wires to get to the places the different things they're trying to get to. So it doesn't make much sense. I would prefer no chin as well, but yeah, my guess is looking for that colorful, friendly, I'm almost calling it like a piece of furniture decoration at this point that's functional. Yeah. But you're right, there is still the stand.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's wild though to see how little is in this. Like this looks like a like Chromebook or something.
It's literally just about the same computer as the M1 Mac Mini, which obviously is much smaller and has more ports actually. But they just take those insides and put it in a much larger display, and then it's attached to it, and it's a really nice display. And if you watch the review, by the way, I want to give it as much credit as I can. Like, the amount of display and computer you get for the money in that iMac is great.
It's the most underrated thing about when people complain about how expensive iMacs are is how good of a screen you're getting, and no one ever takes that into consideration when comparing it to building a PC.
Yeah, so it's a really important, like, well integrated thing. It's also so thin that the headphone jack couldn't be on the back, so they put it on the side. But it's got 2 or 4 ports on the back, depending on which version you get. If you get the base model, 2 ports.
No Ethernet.
No Ethernet, just 2 Thunderbolt ports. If you upgrade to the $14.99 one, I believe that's when you're getting 2 more. So you get 4 ports on the back and Ethernet on the power brick.
I still think Ethernet on the power brick is genius and just a really, really good idea.
It's a good idea. I think it's easy to get mad at it, but I think it's a good idea because no one ever unplugs Ethernet once you plug it in. Why would you
get mad at it? I just don't.
I think people think it's an excuse of like, oh, Apple didn't add it to the back where everything else could have gone. I've seen weird arguments for it. I don't believe those arguments. I think it's a good idea.
Apple's helping me with my cable management. Oh, those jerks.
Yeah,
so I don't know. Unless there's a data transfer restriction that is bottlenecking because of the power cord. It's not, right?
Yeah, full on
I don't know.
gigabit. So good on that. It's just funny that this is the first Apple desktop in many, many years with external power brick because they've all had power built in. It's just too thin.
I don't mind that the more I think about it, though.
Yeah, it's fine. Just sits on the ground.
As long as you can find a good place to put it. If you're one of those psychos that has a desk in the middle of your room that's not up against a wall, maybe it looks a little weird. But other than that, totally fine.
It works for me. But if I were to get one for my own home, I probably would go with blue or silver. Probably blue or silver. Also, shout out to Superstaff who did a really great Photoshop job of a matte black version.
Looks really good.
It was a great Photoshop job. We were all staring at it in the studio, like, did
debating
he get
if
the
it
D-brand
was
skin or did he just make this look really good? He did Photoshop that.
Did you confirm with him?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
he did a breakdown on his Instagram.
Oh, he did a
on how
breakdown?
he did
All
it.
right. I think the way we found out is the little tiny reflection on the table you could tell was silver.
Yeah. My question is now, okay, we've got all the M1 stuff out the way. Great. M1 Max, M1 baseline stuff, M1 iPad, M1 iMac. Is the upgraded Pro version of an Apple Silicon iMac Pro going to get rid of the chin? And will it have black bezels? I don't think so.
Yes. No, and yes is my answer to
no to the chin, yes to the black bezels.
Still has chin, yes has black bezels.
Interesting. I think so much of the Pro stuff in Apple's lineup is boxy and square when you look at Pro Display XDR, when you look at iPad Pro.
Mm-hmm.
I think if Apple is considering matching that Pro aesthetic with the new iMac Pro, they should get rid of the chin on the iMac Pro and make a Pro Display XDR shaped box. But I guess I could see them keeping the chin.
I guess I would just argue is like the chin doesn't make it any less boxy. It's still extremely boxy, and the aspect ratio is different, obviously. Like, well, the screen aspect ratio is the same. The footprint aspect ratio is different, but it's still boxy. I just think space gray seems to be I think it was David saying how like it seems to be their lower range things generally are more colorful. If you look at like iPhone XR and even some other iMacs and stuff like that, and then space gray is the Pro version. Yeah. So I could definitely see space gray, black bezels, Pro, industrial, like professional looking. That's what
Apple, if you're
that'd
listening.
be my guess.
If you're listening, the pros don't care about how thin it is. I promise. None of us care how thin
That's a
it
good
is.
point. The thinness as well. But I bet they keep the chin just because it's the continuity between the two. So when they're putting them in like a store, somebody's not looking like, oh, this is so vastly different. I'm probably losing so much power versus Pro and
That's
the bottom
interesting.
or something like that. Yeah.
Is the iMac Pro sitting in stores next to the iMac?
I don't know.
As an upsell?
I'm just kind of guessing. I
yeah.
would kind of assume so.
I wonder. I don't think a lot of people are buying iMac Pros that don't need them. It's discontinued already, which leads me to believe most people weren't buying it. But I feel like if you can make a good visual argument for why this iMac is different, other than just being black, then it gives people a reason to feel like they're getting more. And so
True. Yeah, my argument goes the opposite way against it as well. You're right.
Yeah. I think obviously I would want them to do it a certain way. I'm just curious what Apple's deciding motive will be. Do they want the continuity or do they want the upsell look?
If the Pro was an Pro Display XDR that just happened to have the computer in the back of that would be sick.
That would be amazing.
That would be awesome.
That would be. I would really like that. But we'll have to see. But there's a lot of great rumors about just like way more power, way more GPU cores, way more big high power cores, and like obviously that we'll have to see it when it happens. Maybe it's M2, maybe it's M1X. We'll see
M1X
that when it
seems
happens.
to be the favorite so far.
But I'm very interested in that. But we also got M1 iPad Pro. This to me is a incredible spec bump, but it's still an iPad. And I feel like every review said this basically, which is like,
I'm going to be honest. You were like really excited to talk about this. And I was like, I really thought we just decided it was.
I mean, so I did the review and you should watch the review. It's 15 minutes long. It's like everything you need to know about this. I would love to know what we're going to get at WWDC that's going to change the iPad. That's really what I am curious about now. We're going to see in like a month. But M1 iPad Pro is
We're gonna see in like 2
ludicrous.
weeks.
Yeah, it's like
By the
first
time
week of
this
June.
comes out, yeah.
M1 iPad Pro though, currently it's iPad OS 14, so we've had the same software for a bit, but it is just immensely powerful and super impressive for what that chip did. I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I didn't think it would be this much better than A15 Bionic or whatever it was already, A12Z, and it's way better. It benchmarks higher than the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and at a certain point, it's like, what are you going to do with all that extra power? You're still using iPad OS. You're still limited by the ports and the file management situation and the multi-window ability, kinda. And I can't wait for a little bit extra power. One comment I've seen a lot is, why do you guys keep asking for like Mac OS on the iPad? Like, just get a Mac.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what I want. I don't want Mac OS on the iPad. I just want better iPad OS. It's a difference. I like the icons. I like the widgets. Let us put widgets all over the screen. Give us free multi-window with touch support. I'm not asking for that on the Mac. I don't want a Mac that does that. I'm personally not in that camp. And then just the ability to do a little bit more multitasking. And obviously the pencil is incredible already, and that chip dominates iPad OS. It's great. So that's all I'm saying is the M1 iPad Pro with that chip and the performance you get out of it is way more powerful than anything you are able to take advantage of. There's no apps yet out there that are, every visually intensive game that I tried was already fine and is still fine on the new one. Honestly, the biggest difference you'll notice is the new XDR display, which is only on the larger 12.9-inch iPad Pro. I am personally a smaller 11-inch iPad Pro user, and so I will continue to use my 2018 11-inch iPad Pro.
I think a lot of people have that, yeah.
Because it's just as good. It's still 120 Hz display, and it's not getting the XDR update, which looks phenomenal with HDR content, but it's not on the small one, so don't need it yet.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So you're just saying this new iPad basically is just like way, way too powerful for what it is. That you can't like fully grasp or benefit from it.
Yeah, it's like that. If you were in charge of, like, there's maybe 3 different things you can improve about the iPad. You can way improve the specs, you can way improve the software, or you can way improve like the design. They've improved the specs and performance so much that it's ahead of the other pieces of the iPad.
Yeah.
And you don't really get to enjoy all the benefits of the M1 because nothing gets there yet. So if you get a new iPad from last year, you're going to get the same experience.
You're saying it's so powerful and something almost like if you had a pickup truck that could go 0 to 60 in like 4.5 seconds. Something like that.
It'd be like if you had a car that could go 0 to 60, but you needed a pickup truck.
I was trying to segue.
You were segueing in F-150.
Come on,
I like the... Finish the segue. I like the segue. Go for it. Finish that one, because that was...
I don't want to anymore.
Are there any pickup trucks that do 0 to 60 in 4.5? Or are you just hypothetically making one up?
I'm so sad right now. Are we leaving this part in? Or
No, there is a pickup truck that goes 0 to 60 in 4.5. And we're trying to get our hands on it. It's made by Ford. I don't know if you guys heard about this one.
F-150 Lightning.
It's official.
Yeah. We finally got... we talked about it before. We just got some specs. Let's go over specs really quick because I think we've both talked about this. I think you've said this is going to be the most important EV of this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the most important EV since Model 3
I would agree with that
right?
too.
Like the Model Y was great, crossover, very popular, but like Model 3 was like the first EV that really brought it to like a more general consumer. So I consider that extremely important. This we're now getting something that's going to bring this to a whole new group of consumers.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is insanely, insanely important.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing to what you said is like EVs for years and years were different in a way where like you had Nissan Leaf and you had like sports cars like the Roadster. And so anytime anyone made or considered an electric car, it was such a vast departure from what people were used to that they almost just didn't even worry about it.
Yep.
Now, EVs are a better version of the car you already were thinking about getting.
Yeah.
And that's where they need to be.
That's why this is important for this pickup truck, especially.
Exactly. So the specs on the F-150 Lightning. So starting price, actually, I'll just start with that, $39,900. Really good.
That is nuts. I saw a lot of comparisons to that price to base Ford or F-150s, and it's a completely unfair comparison because the base F-150 is a 2-door, and the base Lightning is the Super Crew, which is what Ford calls their 4-door.
Right.
So if you look at the cheapest Super Crew F-150, it starts at $36,000. So
Okay.
we're talking about a $3,000 price difference between
And
bases of these.
And that is before the tax credit that you are still qualified for.
Even if you throw that out the door, like, I mean, we haven't really seen any one-to-one comparisons of EVs to a specific gas car, but like that is very, very close.
Yeah.
Like I think almost anybody while buying a car would probably be okay with the $3,000 price difference.
Now that's going to be the base model, which gets 230 miles of range, and there's also going to be an upgraded model that gets 300 miles of range, and I think that's about 50. And if we're just going to compare that spec right off the bat, we've got Cybertruck coming in anywhere from 35 to 70K.
Yeah, there isn't a higher. I think there's one version you can get that goes all the way to like $90,000. So I think just like the F-150, there's going to be multiple trim levels of this.
Yep. There's a Hummer truck that's going to be over 100K. There's a Rivian R1T that's going to be like 60, 70, 80K. So this is a great starting price for F-150 Lightning. So now here's the other specs. And we're going down the spec sheet, not just to read a spec sheet, but because specs are important to truck buyers. That's a specific important thing. Towing capacity, hauling capacity, the things it's capable of. Specs actually really matter here. So I'm not even going to talk about design. It looks like a normal F-150. But 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, honestly, who cares? But there's something about having one gear where you don't have 10 different speeds in an electric and a gas motor to go through. So if I just explain this, I watched a really good video on this. I'm going to try to condense it, but I'm also linking in the show notes so you guys can watch the whole thing. But basically what's happening is when you're hauling a bunch of stuff, you need as much torque as you possibly can get so that you're effectively pulling it. And gas engines have their peak torque at certain RPMs. So let's say that's 4,000 RPM, just as an example. That means if you're way below 4,000 RPM or way above 4,000 RPM, you're not quite getting peak effectiveness out of that motor. Your torque band, exactly. Your torque band is pretty narrow. So when you shift gears, you are trying to stay in that ideal torque band. So the way they got around this was like the F-150 now is a 10 speed.
Yeah.
So every time you shift gears, you're trying to stay in that ideal torque band for maximum efficiency as you shift gears over and over and over again. Big trucks have like 21 gears. This is so they can keep in their ideal torque band. Electric motors have a massive instantaneously available torque band, which is from 0 RPM. So that right away, even though like the 0 to 60 doesn't really matter for a pickup truck, the number you should care about is torque, which is, I think I might have written it down, but it's something like 735 pound-feet of torque. And it's available at that peak torque number all the time as you're driving it, instead of only in that small bit of your individual gears. That's the spec that matters for hauling. That's good for efficiency. That's just good for driving while hauling. So that's number one.
775 pound-feet of torque.
There you go.
Just wanted to confirm that. Yeah.
Cool. And then the other one is you can max out at 10,000 pounds of towing capacity, which I think is higher than the other maximum F-150
That's the other thing. There's a couple different. The standard rate version 5,000 or 7,700, and then the max is 10,000. I don't know what regular is, but I highly doubt it is more than that.
Yeah, so 10,000 pounds of towing capacity is also awesome. Then there's just a couple other cool things that they're doing with the fact that it's electric. So again, you just have that. It's already a better truck. Now, because there is no engine in the front, there is a massive, I think it's the biggest front trunk I've ever seen in any EV. You can fit 2 golf bags in the front trunk of an F-150.
You were watching that video and you're like, he has a whole golf bag in there. And then later in the video, he pulls it out and there's still another one in there. So yeah.
It's like, that's amazing. So it's a huge front trunk. That's great for pickup truck people because, as they rightly point out, typically pickup trucks don't have covered storage unless you have a cover for your bed. So if you want a covered locked trunk in your pickup truck instead of throwing it in the back seat, you now have a real trunk.
Yeah.
It's in the front. You also still have the bed. They have a bunch of outlets. I think it's 6 outlets in the front. You have got a 240 volt for like an air compressor. You can charge things, huge power tools from the front or the back. All this is awesome. And then the cherry on top is you can get a power inverter for your house. It's optional.
Yeah.
That will allow your truck's battery to be your house backup battery in case of power outage for up to like a couple days, maybe a week.
I think the guy in that video said that in order for his Tesla Powerwall to equal what the truck would have done, he would have had 2 of them.
Right. The max output of a single Powerwall isn't as much as the F-150 is able to output.
Wild.
So,
which is also just great, not for that, but like you said, you're on a construction site and you're working on a house that doesn't have electricity. Like, without having to run a gas generator in the back of the truck or on the ground,
that's what you're saying.
This truck is,
Yeah. You now have a massive portable electric generator in the form of your truck.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm curious about is Ford hasn't given a number to anyone that I've seen yet for the size of the battery, kilowatt hour size. Just for context, like Model 3 or Model S right now has a 100 kilowatt hour battery.
Mm-hmm.
That's about like industry standard type. I think Mach-E is at like 80 kilowatt hours. Porsche Taycan's at like 93 kilowatt hours. We're somewhere around 100. A truck like that with enough space, I would actually expect to be more, maybe 100 to 150, but we don't have a number.
No.
And I'm very curious about a lot of the little variables about when you're hauling with that much battery, how much does your range suffer? They've already got an onboard scale in the back of the truck, so it'll adjust how much your projected range is and tell you where to charge based on how much range you'll get with what you're hauling. But like, is that minus 50 miles? Is it minus 100? I don't really know. I haven't hauled stuff, 10,000 pounds of stuff in my car, so I don't know. What will charging be like? There's a Ford Pass app that will show you, the Electrify America charges and all the charges you're capable of charging at. But what does that look like when you pull up to a charger with a trailer?
That actually is something. So like, I think the main thing this will not benefit is people who are like hauling long distances. Like this would make no sense to get. And I think one of those main reasons is the majority of chargers on the road, you would have to, although I do think the charging port's on the front of this.
It is.
It's the front logo by the front door, right?
Yes.
So I guess you could pull forward, but like, I'm just thinking of some of the chargers around us, you would be blocking parking lot if you had your trailer still connected. So like, not only does charging take longer than gassing up, you're now disconnecting your trailer potentially. And then, that doesn't sound ideal, but I do think the majority of people, and I mean, we live in New Jersey, the densest populated state in all of America. So maybe I'm just completely naive here, but like, I do think if you have the 300-mile range version, if you're doing construction generally in a day, I don't think you're driving more than 300 miles, whether now you're pulling power from tools or you're pulling power, losing range from towing, maybe that would start getting it. But I still think huge benefit is every morning you're starting with the quote unquote full tank. Whereas when I used to do landscaping and we were towing stuff, we filled every day. And we were definitely not driving 300 miles. It's just super inefficient and you're just filling all the time.
Yeah. It's one of those stats where I think weirdly it could actually benefit from Ford not being efficient in the drivetrain. Meaning, if this is a 100 kilowatt hour battery, for example, and you're like powering a bunch of tools and plugging a bunch of things in, and then trying to get home on less range while towing stuff, that might be a concern. Where if this is a 150 kilowatt hour battery, then all of those tools and things you're plugging in might not hit your range as significantly as far as a percentage. Just something to keep in mind. I don't know. This is where I was just thinking, like, if you're comparing it to the others, the Cybertruck is still the one where I'm like, all right, if you're really after the specs and the numbers, the Cybertruck with 520 miles of range and I think even more towing capacity is probably still on the radar. But other than that, F-150 Lightning is, I'm excited for it. And I think by the time you guys see this podcast, there may already be a video on the channel of a hands-on with it because we're trying to work that out. So that's planned, and that is I think a pretty important EV to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Keeping an eye on it for both the consumer buyer who buys trucks, but also the reason the F-150 is the most popular vehicle in America is there's also lots of fleets of businesses who will be looking at buying this, saving money on cost per mile, and just glad to see that actually worked out. They got the specs, I think, pretty well.
Yeah, I do.
Sick. All right. Well, that was a whole lot of Waveform. I think you've probably either skipped around or heard enough, but thanks for sticking with us. And we'll be back next week with, of course, much more to talk about. Catch you guys in the next one.